The morning cafe buzzed with conversation, but at table 7, silence hung heavy. A young CEO sat across from her small daughter, the little girl's head bowed low, lips pressed tight. The waitress whispered, "Poor thing, she's mute." The CEO's jaw tightened. "Just say hello. Sophie." One word. Nearby customers began to snicker. Then something unexpected happened. A single father in the corner looked up, his hands moving in graceful gestures, sign language. The little girl's eyes suddenly lit up. Her small hands began signing back. The CEO's coffee cup slipped from her trembling fingers. Meet Daniel Cole. 36 years old, calloused hands that tell stories of hard work, and a heart that carries the weight of loss. He's an electrician by trade, but that's not what defines him. What defines Daniel is the rubber bracelet around his wrist, engraved with 4 simple words: listen with your heart. 2 years ago, his world shattered. Sarah, his wife, his soulmate, lost her voice to throat cancer in her final months. But Daniel refused to let silence win. He learned sign language, spending sleepless nights mastering each gesture, each movement, determined to hear every word Sarah couldn't speak aloud. Even when the doctor said there was no hope, Daniel's hands never stopped talking to hers. Sarah passed on a Tuesday morning, her hands spelling "I love you" one last time. Now Daniel raises their 8-year-old daughter Emma alone. She's a burst of sunshine with paint-stained fingers and an imagination that turns their small apartment into castles and rocket ships. Emma learned sign language naturally, switching between spoken words and silent gestures like a bilingual child switches between languages. She draws pictures of her mother with angel wings and practices signing bedtime stories to her stuffed animals. Every morning, Daniel and Emma stop at Corner Cafe before school and work. It's their ritual, their moment of peace in a chaotic world. Emma colors in her sketchbook while Daniel reads the news, both comfortable in their pocket of calm. But across town lives a different kind of family. Isabella Lane is 32 and commands boardrooms like a general commands armies, CEO of a marketing empire, designer heels that click authority with every step, and a reputation for never accepting impossible as an answer. She built her company from nothing after her divorce, proving every doubter wrong with sheer determination and 16-hour workdays. Her daughter Sophie is 7 years old, with her mother's striking features and eyes that hold secrets. 6 months ago, a car accident changed everything. Not physically, Sophie escaped without a scratch, but something inside broke that day. The words just stopped. Doctors call it selective mutism, a trauma response where the mind chooses silence as protection. Isabella doesn't understand silence. She understands results, solutions, fixes. She's hired the best therapists, bought every recommended book, tried every suggested technique. But Sophie remains locked in her quiet world, and Isabella feels helpless for the first time in her adult life. The whispers follow them everywhere. Poor little rich girl. What's wrong with her? If I had that kind of money, I'd fix my kid. Each comment cuts deeper, not because Isabella cares what strangers think, but because she's starting to believe them. Maybe she is failing her daughter. Maybe love isn't enough. This morning, Isabella made a decision. She would take Sophie to the most public place she could think of, the busy corner cafe during rush hour. Exposure therapy, her latest therapist called it, forced Sophie to speak by removing the option of hiding. "Today you're going to say hello to someone," Isabella announced over breakfast. "Just one word. You can do this, sweetheart." Sophie's spoon clinked against her bowl, her only response. They arrived at Corner Cafe at 8:30 sharp, Isabella's heels announcing their entrance. She chose a center table, maximum visibility, no escape route. Sophie slumped in her chair like she was trying to disappear into the upholstery. "Sit up straight," Isabella whispered. "People are watching," and they were. Daniel noticed them immediately. the overdressed woman and the shrinking child. Something about the little girl's posture, the way she hunched her shoulders like the world was too loud, reminded him of Sarah in those final weeks. He touched his bracelet unconsciously. The morning crowd grew thicker, business suits and briefcases creating a symphony of importance around Sophie's silent table. Isabella ordered 2 hot chocolates and a croissant, her voice crisp and professional, even with the teenage barista. "What would you like, Sophie?" Isabella asked loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Use your words." Sophie's fingers traced invisible patterns on the marble tabletop. Her lips stayed sealed. The businessman at table 3 glanced over, his expression shifting from curiosity to pity. A mother with twin toddlers whispered to her friend, "That poor child. Something's clearly wrong with her." Isabella's cheeks flushed. She leaned closer to Sophie, her whisper sharp with frustration. "Just say hot chocolate. Baby, 2 words. You can do 2 words." Sophie shook her head almost imperceptibly, tears gathering in her dark eyes. The barista approached with their order, a teenager with purple hair and kind eyes. "Here you go," she said gently, placing the steaming cups down. She looked at Sophie with understanding. "I love your hair bow. Purple's my favorite color, too." Sophie looked up briefly, the ghost of a smile flickering across her face, but no words came. "She doesn't talk," Isabella said quickly, her tone defensive. "She's working through some issues." The barista nodded sympathetically and moved away, but Isabella caught her whispering to her coworker behind the counter. More stares, more whispers. The woman at table 5, expensive handbag, perfect manicure, leaned toward her companion. 7 years old and can't even say hello? My nephew had speech delays, but at least he tried. Some children just need more discipline. Isabella's grip tightened on her coffee cup. The familiar burn of inadequacy rose in her chest. All her success, all her achievements, and she couldn't help her own daughter speak a single word. "Sophie, look at me." Isabella's voice carried an edge now. "Everyone here can talk. The babies, the teenagers, even the dog outside is barking. What makes you so special that you get to stay quiet?" The words hit like physical blows. Sophie flinched, shrinking further into her chair. The tears that had been threatening finally spilled over, rolling silently down her cheeks. "Oh, honey, no." Isabella immediately regretted her harshness, reaching across the table. "I didn't mean. I just want to hear your voice again." But Sophie was already shutting down, retreating to that unreachable place where Isabella's words couldn't follow. Her small body began to shake with silent sobs. The cafe's ambient noise seemed to amplify around them. Conversations grew louder. Chair legs scraped against tiles. The espresso machine hissed like a dragon. Sophie covered her ears, overwhelmed by the sensory assault. "She'll never be normal," the businessman muttered to his colleague, not bothering to lower his voice. "Kids like that, they're damaged goods." His words cut through the air like glass. Isabella spun toward him, her CEO persona blazing. "Excuse me?" The man shrugged, unfazed by her fury. "Just saying what everyone's thinking. What's the point of money if you can't fix your own kid?" The cafe fell silent. Even the espresso machine seemed to pause its hissing. All eyes turned to their table, where Sophie sat trembling, trying to make herself invisible. Isabella stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly. Her hands shook with rage and humiliation. "You have no right, Isabella!" A calm voice interrupted her outburst. She turned to see Daniel standing beside their table, his work clothes marking him as different from the suited crowd. His presence radiated a quiet strength that seemed to still the chaos around them. "May I?" he asked, gesturing towards Sophie. Isabella hesitated. This stranger, this blue-collar worker, wanted to... What? Fix what she couldn't? Daniel didn't wait for permission. He crouched down to Sophie's eye level, his movements slow and deliberate. His hands began to move in graceful, flowing gestures, sign language. His fingers spelled out, "You are safe. You are seen. You are enough." Sophie's head snapped up, her tear-filled eyes widening in shock. Someone was talking to her in a language that didn't require her broken voice. Tentatively, her small hands began to move. Shaky at first, then with growing confidence. Her fingers formed words in the air. Scared. Too loud. Can't speak. The entire café held its breath. This child who hadn't spoken in months was having a conversation, not with words, but with something more powerful. Daniel smiled and signed back. "I understand. You don't need words to be heard." Sophie's face transformed. The fear melted away, replaced by wonder. She began signing faster, her story pouring out through her hands. The accident, the fear, the pressure, the silence that felt safer than sound. Emma appeared beside her father, having finished her coloring. She watched Sophie's hands move and began interpreting softly. She says she dreams in colors instead of words. She says her voice got scared and hid inside her heart. The businessman who had been so cruel moments before sat in stunned silence. The woman with the perfect manicure looked down at her lap, shame coloring her cheeks. Isabella collapsed back into her chair, staring at her daughter as if seeing her for the first time. Sophie wasn't broken. She wasn't damaged. She was communicating perfectly. Isabella just hadn't been listening in the right language. Would you have stepped in or stayed silent? Isabella stared at Daniel, her world tilting on its axis. How did you do that?" Her voice cracked with emotion. "She hasn't communicated with anyone in 6 months. The therapists, the specialists, nobody could reach her." Daniel straightened slowly, his eyes never leaving Sophie's animated hands as she continued signing to Emma. "She's not silent," he said quietly. "You just weren't listening." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. All this time, she'd been trying to fix Sophie instead of understanding her. She'd been so focused on getting her daughter to speak that she never considered Sophie might have something important to say in her own way. "I don't understand sign language," Isabella whispered, watching her daughter's face light up as she told Emma about her drawings, her dreams, her fears. "How am I supposed to hear her?" Daniel reached down and unclasped the rubber bracelet from his wrist. The simple black band looked worn, loved, carried through countless difficult days. He held it out to Isabella, letting her read the engraved words, "Listen with your heart." "My wife gave this to me," Daniel said, his voice thick with memory. "When she lost her voice to cancer, she made me promise to remember that communication isn't just about words. Sometimes the most important things are said in silence." Isabella took the bracelet with trembling fingers, feeling the weight of its significance. "I've been such a fool," she breathed. "I've been trying to force her to be what I needed instead of accepting who she is." Sophie looked up from her conversation with Emma, noticing the bracelet in her mother's hands. Her small fingers began to move again, this time directed at Isabella. Emma translated softly. She says she loves you even when you can't hear her. She says she's been trying to tell you about the pictures in her mind, the stories she makes up, the way music looks like dancing rainbows." Tears streamed down Isabella's face. "She's been trying to share her world with me, and I kept demanding she enter mine." Suddenly, Sophie stood up from her chair and walked around the table. For the first time in months, she approached her mother without hesitation. She took Isabella's hands and placed them over her heart, then began to sign slowly, deliberately. Emma's voice became a bridge between mother and daughter. "She says her voice isn't broken, it's just different. She says she loves you with colors instead of words." Isabella broke down completely, pulling Sophie into her arms. "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry for not listening." But Sophie had more to share. She gently pulled away and began signing an elaborate story, her hands painting pictures in the air. Her eyes sparkled with joy as she finally had an audience who wanted to understand. Emma continued translating. She says in her dreams, she meets a lady with angel wings who teaches her how to paint with her hands. The lady says that sometimes the most beautiful songs are the ones only hearts can hear. Daniel's breath caught. He touched the empty space on his wrist where his bracelet used to rest. Sarah, he whispered. Sophie nodded vigorously and signed something directly to Daniel. Emma smiled through her tears. She says the angel lady looks like your Emma, but grown up. She says the angel told her that love speaks all languages, even the silent ones. The entire cafe had become an amphitheater for this miraculous moment. What had started as public humiliation had transformed into something sacred. Customers who had been cruel and dismissive now watched in awe as Sophie told her story through graceful gestures. The businessman who had called Sophie damaged goods stood up slowly. His face was red with shame. I owe you an apology, he said, his voice barely audible. All of you, I was wrong. He wasn't alone. The woman with the perfect manicure approached their table, her expensive handbag forgotten. My daughter is deaf, she said quietly. I've spent so much energy hiding it, being embarrassed by it. Watching you celebrate your daughter's way of communicating. I feel ashamed of myself. Sophie looked at the woman and signed something beautiful. Emma interpreted. She says everyone has their own language. Some people speak with their mouths, some with their hands, some with their hearts. All of them are perfect. The woman began to cry. Would you teach me that? What she just said. Daniel stepped forward, and for the next few minutes, the cafe became an impromptu sign language classroom. Sophie became the teacher, showing grown adults how to say hello and thank you and I see you with their hands. The teenage barista with purple hair came over during her break. I've been learning ASL in college, she said. Would it be okay if I practiced with Sophie sometimes when you come in? Sophie's face lit up like Christmas morning. She signed rapidly to Emma. She says yes. She says she wants to help teach others too. She wants to show people that quiet doesn't mean empty. Isabella watched her daughter transform from a scared, silent child into a confident young teacher, and finally understood what she'd been missing. Sophie wasn't broken. She was gifted. She saw the world differently, experienced it more deeply, and had so much to share if only people would learn her language. Daniel, Isabella said, still clutching his bracelet, you gave my daughter back to me. How can I ever repay you? Daniel shook his head, watching Emma and Sophie giggle together as they taught the barista how to sign rainbow. You don't owe me anything. Just let her be heard, in her own way. Sophie ran back to her mother and took her hands again. This time, she guided Isabella's fingers into simple shapes, teaching her the sign for I love you. Isabella's hands shook as she copied the movement. It was clumsy, imperfect, but Sophie beamed with pride. Her mother was finally learning to speak her language. I love you too, Isabella signed back, the words feeling more powerful in silence than they ever had out loud. For the first time in 6 months, Sophie's lips curved into a smile that reached her eyes. She had found her voice, and her mother had learned to listen. The transformation in the cafe was nothing short of miraculous. What had begun as a place of judgment and cruelty became a sanctuary of understanding and acceptance. The customers who had whispered cruel comments and rolled their eyes now sat in respectful silence, many wiping tears from their eyes. The businessman who had called Sophie damaged goods approached their table with his head bowed. Ma'am, he said to Isabella, his voice thick with regret, I have 3 children of my own, and if anyone spoke about them the way I spoke about your daughter, I would never forgive them. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I will never make that mistake again. Isabella looked at him for a long moment, then at Sophie, who was watching the exchange with curious eyes. Sophie, she said, signing as best she could, this man wants to say sorry. Sophie studied the businessman's face, seeing something there that adults often missed: genuine remorse. She signed something to Emma, who translated, "She says everyone makes mistakes when they're scared of things they don't understand." She forgives him. The man's composure cracked completely. He knelt down to Sophie's level. "Thank you," he whispered. "You're braver than any adult in this room." A elderly woman at the corner table slowly stood up, her cane tapping against the floor. She was probably in her 70s, with silver hair and eyes that had seen decades of change. "Young lady," she called out to Sophie, "you just taught this old woman something beautiful. You speak with your hands, and we can all understand. It's poetry in motion." She began to clap slowly, deliberately. The sound echoed through the cafe like a heartbeat. The purple-haired barista joined in, then the mother with the twin toddlers, then the businessman. One by one, every person in the cafe rose to their feet, applauding not with pity, but with genuine admiration and respect. Sophie stood on her chair, her small hands moving in graceful gestures that needed no translation. She was saying thank you in the most beautiful way possible. The twins at table 6 broke free from their mother and ran over to Sophie, their chubby hands attempting to copy her movements. They giggled as Sophie patiently taught them how to sign friend, turning the lesson into a game. Even the cafe's elderly manager emerged from behind the counter, his eyes misty. "In 40 years of running this place," he announced to the room, "I've never seen anything more beautiful than what just happened here. Sophie, you and your family will always have a table at Corner Cafe. Always." The woman with the perfect manicure, who had earlier whispered cruel judgments, now sat at their table. "I called my daughter," she said to Isabella. "She's coming to pick me up. I want her to meet Sophie. My granddaughter was born deaf, and I've been ashamed. But watching Sophie today, seeing how proud she is of who she is, I realize I've been the one with the disability. I couldn't see the beauty and difference." Emma pulled out her sketchbook and drew a quick picture. Two little girls holding hands under a rainbow, one signing and one speaking, both smiling. She tore out the page and handed it to Sophie. Sophie studied the drawing, then carefully folded it and placed it in her pocket. She signed to Emma, and the translation needed no words. It was written in the joy on both girls' faces. The cafe that had buzzed with judgment now hummed with acceptance. Stories were shared, tears were shed, and barriers were broken down by two children who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. 3 weeks later, Isabella sat in the same corner cafe, but everything was different. She wore jeans instead of a business suit, and her hands moved confidently through sign language as she chatted with Sophie over hot chocolate. They came here every morning now, not for exposure therapy, but for joy. Daniel approached their table with Emma, both carrying coffee and warm smiles. "Mind if we join you?" he asked, and already knowing the answer. "Please." Isabella signed and spoke simultaneously, a skill she'd been practicing religiously. Sophie bounced in her seat and immediately began telling Emma about her new art project through rapid sign language. The two girls had become inseparable, united by their bilingual abilities and shared understanding that communication came in many forms. "How's the sign language class going?" Daniel asked, settling into his chair. Isabella laughed, a sound lighter than it had been in months. "Harder than running a Fortune 500 company, but more rewarding than any deal I've ever closed. Sophie's teaching half my board of directors now. She's become quite the little instructor." Through the window, they could see the businessman from that fateful morning walking by. He waved and signed, "Good morning," clumsy but sincere. He'd been taking classes too, inspired by his own daughter to be more inclusive. "The strangest thing happened yesterday," Isabella continued. "A mother contacted me through my company. Her son has autism and doesn't speak traditionally. She'd heard about Sophie somehow and wanted to know if we'd be willing to share our story. Apparently, there are a lot of families out there feeling alone." Daniel smiled, remembering Sarah's words from long ago. Every voice matters, even the quiet ones. Sophie tugged on Isabella's sleeve and signed something urgent. Emma translated with a grin. She wants to know if she can start a club at school, a place where kids who communicate differently can hang out together. What would you call this club? Isabella asked, her hands moving with growing fluency. Sophie's response needed no translation. She pointed to Daniel's wrist, where he now wore a new bracelet, one Sophie had made for him. It was purple and silver, with beads that spelled out "Listen with your heart" in the alphabet that Sophie had taught him. The Listen Club, Emma announced, where everyone has a voice, no matter how they use it. Isabella looked around the cafe that had once been a place of her greatest humiliation and now felt like home. The purple-haired barista signed "Good morning" as she passed. The elderly manager had learned to fingerspell customers' names. Even the twins knew how to sign "Please" and "Thank you." You know, Isabella said to Daniel, Sophie hasn't spoken a word out loud yet, and I've never heard her voice more clearly. Sophie beamed and signed her favorite phrase, the one that had started it all. Love speaks all languages. Daniel touched his bracelet and smiled. Sarah would have loved this place, these people, this beautiful proof that listening with your heart could change the world, one conversation at a time. Subscribe if you believe every child deserves to be heard.